Everyone screamed at her to stop. The rancher's wife had already lost her mind. But through the smoke and flames, she could hear a child crying, and her husband Elias was still inside. This wasn't how mail-order brides were supposed to end up. She was supposed to cook, clean, maybe survive a Montana winter if she was lucky. Instead, here she was, about to die for people who'd spent months laughing at her. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you want to know how a German immigrant with a violin became the most feared woman in Yellowstone County, stick around until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let me take you back to where it started, to the day Elias Mercer made the worst decision of his life. The train was 40 minutes late, which gave Elias Mercer plenty of time to regret everything. He stood on the depot platform in Livingston, Montana territory, hat pulled low, arms crossed tight against his chest like he was trying to hold himself together. March wind cut across the tracks, carrying the smell of coal smoke and distant snow. Around him, other men waited, cowboys heading north, miners going south, a few ranchers picking up supplies. Nobody talked to Elias. They never did. That was fine. He preferred it that way. In his coat pocket, folded into a square so tight the creases had gone white, was a letter. He'd read it maybe 30 times since it arrived 6 weeks ago. Formal handwriting, decent English, though some words were spelled the German way. She'd answered his advertisement, agreed to his terms, and promised to arrive on the 15th of March, 1891. He'd sent money for the ticket, sent a photograph too, though he hated how stiff he looked in it, like someone had shoved a rifle barrel down his spine. The photographer and Bozeman kept telling him to smile, and Elias had told the photographer exactly where he could shove that suggestion. Now he was waiting for a woman he'd never met, who was coming to marry him because he'd posted an advertisement like she was a piece of livestock he was ordering from a catalog. The whole thing made his stomach turn, but the alternative was worse. Another winter alone in that cabin. Another year of silence so thick it pressed against his skull. Another season watching his land grow while everything human inside him shriveled up and died. So here he was. The train whistle screamed somewhere east, and Elias felt his jaw tighten. When the locomotive finally screeched into the station, belching black smoke and steam, Elias didn't move. He watched passengers climb down, families, businessmen, a couple of women in traveling clothes who were met immediately by waiting husbands. His eyes scanned each one, trying to match them to the description in the letter. 26 years old, brown hair, medium height, will carry a violin case. The platform was clearing out. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. Maybe she hadn't come. Maybe she'd taken his money and laughed all the way back to, "Are you Elias Mercer?" The voice came from behind him, sharp and clear with an accent that turned his name into Elias. He turned. The woman standing 3 feet away was not what he expected. She was tall, taller than most women he'd seen, nearly eye level with him. Dark brown hair pinned up tight under a plain hat, but pieces had come loose during the journey and curled against her neck. Her traveling dress was simple, dark blue wool, dusty from the train. She held a violin case in her left hand and a worn leather bag in her right, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't soft, weren't shy, weren't anything like the demure, grateful expression he'd imagined a mail-order bride might wear. They were furious. I said, "Are you Elias Mercer?" She said it slower this time, like maybe he was stupid. "I am." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Good." She dropped her bag at his feet. "Then you can explain why your photograph made you look like an undertaker, and why your letter promised a established homestead when half the town I just passed through looks like it was built last Tuesday." Elias stared at her. Somewhere behind them, the train was pulling away, and the last few passengers were heading toward the street. The depot agent was watching them with unconcealed interest. "My homestead's 20 miles north of here," Elias said finally. "Town's got nothing to do with me." 20 miles. Clara Reinhardt looked around the depot like she was measuring exactly how far she was from anything resembling civilization. "Of course it is. That was in the letter." The letter said remote. It didn't say I'd need a military expedition to reach it. "You want remote or you want neighbors? Can't have both." Clara's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, she just looked at him, really looked, like she was cataloging every scar, every wrinkle, every piece of evidence that Elias Mercer was exactly as hard as his reputation suggested. Then she said, "You're older than your photograph. Photograph's 4 years old. You look meaner in person." "I am meaner in person." Something flickered across her face. Not fear exactly, but a kind of grim acknowledgement. She picked up her bag. "Well, are we going to stand here insulting each other, or are you going to take me to this established homestead before it gets dark?" Elias grabbed her other bag, the violin she kept hold of herself, and started toward the wagon without another word. Behind them, the depot agent was grinning like he'd just watched the best show in town. Talk. The wagon ride north was the longest 20 miles of Elias's life. Clara sat beside him on the bench seat, spine straight, eyes fixed on the road ahead. She didn't make small talk, didn't ask questions about the landscape or the weather or what her new life would be like. Just sat there, silent and furious, while the wagon rattled over frozen mud and patches of old snow. Elias tried to figure out what exactly he'd done wrong. He'd been honest in his letters. Told her the work was hard, the winters brutal, the isolation complete. Told her he needed someone who could manage a household, help with the ranch during calving season, and survive without luxuries. She'd written back saying she understood, saying she wanted a fresh start in America, away from whatever life she'd left behind in Germany. Now she looked like she wanted to throw him off his own wagon. They passed through a stretch of open valley, snow-covered peaks rising in the distance. The Yellowstone River ran somewhere to the east, hidden behind cottonwood groves that were just starting to bud. Normally, Elias loved this view, the big sky, the endless space, the silence that felt clean instead of empty. Today it just felt accusing. "How long have you been alone out here?" Clara asked suddenly. Elias glanced at her. 6 years. "And before that? Worked cattle drives, saved money, bought land. No family?" "Dead." She absorbed that. "Mine too." It was the first piece of real information she'd offered, and Elias didn't know what to do with it. He kept his eyes on the road. "Why a mail-order bride?" Clara asked. Her tone wasn't mocking exactly, but it wasn't gentle either. "You're not hideous. You could probably find a woman the normal way. Don't get to town much." "That's not an answer." Elias's hands tightened on the reins. "Tried the normal way, didn't work." "What happened?" She took one look at the homestead and got back on the train. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Smart woman." Elias almost smiled. Almost. "Maybe." "So you decided the second time you'd make sure she couldn't leave before seeing it." "Something like that." "And you thought that would work?" "Don't know yet," Elias said. "You planning to get back on that train?" Clara turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd left town. Her expression was impossible to read. "Ask me again in a week." Right. The homestead appeared just before sunset, sprawled across a shallow valley where Flathead Creek cut through open grazing land. Elias had built the main cabin himself. Solid pine logs, stone chimney, real glass windows that had cost him 2 months' wages. The barn was newer, big enough for 20 head of cattle and 4 horses. Fencing stretched east toward the tree line, enclosing maybe 80 acres of decent pasture. It wasn't much, but it was his. Clara climbed down from the wagon before he could offer help. She stood in the yard, violin case still clutched in one hand, and surveyed her new home with the expression of a general inspecting a lost battlefield. "Where's the well?" she asked. 50 feet north of the cabin." "Outhouse?" "Past the barn." "Nearest neighbor?" "Widow Harmon, 3 miles south." Clara nodded slowly. Then she walked straight to the cabin door, pushed it open, and disappeared inside. Elias stood in the yard, holding her bags, wondering what the hell he was supposed to do now. Inside, he could hear her moving around. Boots on the wooden floor, the scrape of a chair, the clatter of something metal. He unhitched the horses, led them to the barn, and took his time brushing them down. When he finally went inside, Clara had lit the oil lamp on the table and was standing in the middle of the single room, hands on her hips. The cabin was exactly what it looked like. One big space with a cooking area on one side, a bed on the other, a table and 2 chairs in the middle. Shelves along the walls held supplies, canned goods, tools, rope, ammunition. Elias's rifle hung above the door, his winter coat on a hook, boots by the fireplace. It looked like exactly what it was. A place where one man had lived alone for 6 years and stopped noticing when things got grim. You sleep there? Clara pointed at the bed in the corner. Usually. And where exactly did you imagine I would sleep? Elias felt his face heat. I can take the floor. For how long? Long as you want. Clara laughed, short and bitter. We're supposed to be married, or did you forget that part? We'll marry when you're ready, Elias said. Not before. She turned to look at him, surprise cracking through her anger for just a second. You'd wait? Said I would in the letters. Men say a lot of things in letters. I keep my word. For a long moment, Clara just stared at him. Then she set her violin case carefully on the table and started unpacking her bag. I'll take the bed. You take the floor. We'll figure out the rest later. Elias nodded. It was more than he'd hoped for. That night, he lay on the floor near the fireplace, wrapped in extra blankets, listening to Clara breathe on the other side of the room. She didn't cry, didn't make any sound at all, but he could feel her fury radiating across the darkness like heat from a stove. He'd brought a stranger into his home, a woman who hated him, a wife who wasn't a wife, and he had absolutely no idea what happened next. Morning came cold and gray. Elias woke to find Clara already up, standing at the stove, trying to figure out how to light it. She was still wearing her traveling dress, hair loose around her shoulders now, feet bare on the cold floor. Flue's stuck, Elias said from his blankets. Clara jumped, spun around. Don't sneak up on people. Wasn't sneaking. You were making enough noise to wake the dead. She scowled at him. Then get up and help me instead of lying there like a lump. Elias pushed to his feet, crossed the room, and jimmied the flue open with the practiced twist he'd done 1,000 times. Smoke started drawing up the chimney properly. Clara watched him, arms crossed. You could have mentioned it was broken, she said. Not broken. Just temperamental. Like you. Elias almost smiled again. He was doing that more in 16 hours with Clara than he had in 6 years alone. Coffee's in the tin on the second shelf. I know where the coffee is. I unpacked half this cabin last night while you snored. I don't snore. You absolutely snore. They stared at each other across the cabin. Then Clara turned back to the stove and started measuring coffee into the pot with sharp, angry movements. Elias pulled on his boots and coat. I've got to check the herd. You need anything before I go? A different husband would be nice. Fresh out of those. Then I'll make do with coffee. He left her there, furious and barefoot, and headed out into the gray morning. The cattle were scattered across the north pasture, shaggy and irritable after the long winter. Elias counted heads, checked for injuries, made mental notes about which cows would calve soon. Normal work, familiar work. But his mind kept drifting back to the cabin, to the woman inside it who looked at him like he was a problem she was trying to solve, who argued with him like she had every right to, who hadn't cried once, even though she was 1,000 miles from anything she knew, married to a man she clearly despised. When he got back to the cabin 2 hours later, Clara had transformed the place. The floor was swept, dishes washed and stacked, supplies reorganized on the shelves in a way that actually made sense. She'd even found his spare blankets and aired them out over the porch railing. The whole cabin smelled like lye soap and coffee. Clara stood in the middle of it all, hands on her hips, looking satisfied with herself. You cleaned, Elias said stupidly. I got bored. In 2 hours? I work fast when I'm angry. She gestured at the table. Sit. I made breakfast. Elias sat. Clara put a plate in front of him. Fried eggs, leftover biscuits from his stores, bacon she must have found in the cold box. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and it was real food, and he realized he hadn't had a proper breakfast in maybe 3 years. Clara sat across from him with her own plate. They ate in silence for a minute. Then she said, Your cattle look underfed. Elias looked up. You went outside? Obviously. In bare feet? I put on boots. They're too big, but they work. She pointed her fork at him. Your herd's too big for the pasture you've got fenced. You need to either sell some or expand the grazing land. I know that. Then why haven't you done it? Been busy. Busy doing what? Sitting alone in this cabin feeling sorry for yourself? Elias's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Excuse me? You heard me. Clara's eyes were fierce. You've got good land here, good water, decent shelter. You could build something real. But instead you're running a half operation like you don't actually care if it succeeds. I care. Then prove it. They stared at each other across the table. Elias felt something hot and unfamiliar rising in his chest. Anger, maybe, or something close to it. Nobody talked to him like this. Nobody dared. You've been here one day, he said slowly. You don't know anything about running a ranch. I know when a man's wasting potential. And what do you know about potential? Clara set down her fork. I was engaged once, back in Bavaria, to a merchant's son. Nice house, nice family, everything a woman's supposed to want. But he didn't actually want to build anything. He wanted to inherit his father's business and coast, spend his life managing something someone else created. She looked at Elias hard. I didn't cross an ocean to watch another man waste good land. Elias absorbed that. What happened to the merchant's son? I left him. Clara picked up her fork again. Scandalized everyone. My family stopped speaking to me, so I came here. That why you agreed to marry a stranger? Seemed more honest than marrying someone I knew and still felt like a stranger. She took a bite of eggs. At least this way, we're both starting from nothing. Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he finished his breakfast in silence, acutely aware of the woman across from him who was apparently planning to rebuild his entire operation, whether he liked it or not. When he stood to clear his plate, Clara stopped him. I'll do it. You've got work. So do you. I've done mine for the morning. She looked at him. Unless you're planning to keep me locked in this cabin like some kind of prisoner, do whatever you want. Good. Clara stood. Then I'm fixing your fence. The section by the creek is about to collapse. She walked out before Elias could respond. He stood in the cabin, holding his empty plate, trying to figure out what had just happened. Shook. The next 3 days were a kind of domestic warfare Elias had never experienced. Clara attacked the homestead like it was personally offending her. She patched the fence herself, badly at first, then better when Elias showed her the right way to tension wire. She reorganized the barn, cleaned out the chicken coop he'd been ignoring, and somehow convinced the chickens to actually start laying again. She cooked meals that were edible, and sometimes better than edible. She washed clothes, mended torn shirts, and fixed the broken shutter on the north window that Elias had been meaning to repair for 2 years. And she argued with him about everything: cattle rotation, water management, where to plant the kitchen garden, how to store grain, when to breed the horses, whether the barn needed a new door or just new hinges. She had opinions on all of it, and she delivered those opinions like artillery fire. Elias argued back. He'd spent 6 years in silence, and now he couldn't seem to shut up. They fought over breakfast about how to run the spring branding. They fought at lunch about whether to buy more chickens. They fought at dinner about nothing at all, just to have something to do with all the noise building up between them. The widow Harmon, who stopped by on the 3rd day with a basket of preserves, took one look at the two of them sniping at each other in the yard and started laughing so hard she had to sit down. Lord have mercy, she wheezed. Elias Mercer, what have you done? Married a crazy woman, Elias said. Married a stubborn mule, Clara shot back. Mrs. Harmon wiped her eyes. You two aren't even properly married yet, are you? They both went silent. Thought so. The widow stood up, still grinning. Well, when you finally get around to it, let me know. I'll bring a cake. If you haven't killed each other first. She left them standing in the yard, both furious, both trying not to look at each other. That night, Clara played her violin for the first time. Elias was outside checking on a mare who'd seemed off that afternoon. When he came back in, Clara was sitting at the table, violin tucked under her chin, bow moving slow and sad across the strings. The melody was something foreign, German maybe, or Austrian. It filled the cabin like smoke, got into every corner, wrapped around Elias's chest, and squeezed. He stood by the door, not wanting to interrupt, barely breathing. When she finished, Clara lowered the violin and looked at him. Her face was different, softer, more tired, less angry. My father taught me, she said, before he died. Elias nodded. Didn't trust himself to speak. I haven't played since I left Bavaria. Why not? Didn't have anywhere safe to keep it on the ship. Didn't have anywhere quiet to play once I got to New York. She ran her fingers along the violin's neck. This cabin's the first place I've been in 2 years where it felt possible. Play whenever you want. Elias said. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Thank you. That night, for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like warfare. It felt like something else, something Elias didn't have words for. On the 5th day, a spring storm rolled in. Elias saw it coming that morning, black clouds piling up over the western peaks, the kind of weather that could drop 6 inches of wet snow and kill newborn calves if you weren't careful. He spent the day moving the herd to lower ground, reinforcing the barn, bringing in extra firewood. Clara worked beside him without being asked. She didn't know how to herd cattle, but she learned fast. Didn't complain when the wind picked up and the temperature dropped, just pulled her coat tighter and kept moving. By late afternoon, the snow started. They got the last of the cattle secured and ran for the cabin. Inside, Clara shook snow from her hair and immediately went to build up the fire. Elias checked the windows, made sure the door was sealed tight. How long will it last? Clara asked. Day, maybe 2. And the cattle? They'll be fine if we got them all. Clara nodded. She was soaked through, shivering, but she went straight to the stove and started making coffee. Elias watched her move around the cabin, his cabin, which had somehow become their cabin in less than a week, and felt something shift in his chest. Clara. She turned. You did good today. She blinked, surprised. That's the first nice thing you've said to me. You haven't given me much reason. Neither have you. Fair point. Elias pulled off his wet coat. We should probably talk. About what? About this. He gestured between them. About what we're doing here. Clara set down the coffee pot. All right, talk. Elias had rehearsed this conversation in his head a dozen times, but now that the moment was here, all his words scattered. I know this isn't what you wanted, coming out here, living like this, marrying someone like me. You don't know what I wanted. Then tell me. Clara was quiet for a moment. Outside, wind howled against the cabin walls. Snow hissed against the windows. Finally, she said, I wanted something real, something I could build with my own hands instead of just inheriting or marrying into. I wanted to matter. You matter. Not in Bavaria. There I was just decorative, expected to smile and agree and produce children and never have an original thought. She looked at him hard. I didn't come to Montana to be decorative. Good, Elias said, because I don't need decorative. I need a partner. Clara's expression shifted, surprise maybe, or something close to hope. A partner. Someone who can run this place when I can't. Someone who'll tell me when I'm being an idiot. Someone who won't break when things get hard. He took a breath. Someone like you. For a long moment, Clara just looked at him. Then she crossed the cabin and stood directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the snow melting in her hair. If we're partners, she said, then we're equals. You don't give me orders, you don't make decisions without me, and you don't treat me like property. Agreed. And I want a proper bed, a real one, not that lumpy thing in the corner. I'll build you one. And a bookshelf. Done. And you have to actually talk to me, not just grunt and nod. Elias almost smiled. I'll try. Clara searched his face like she was looking for a lie. Then she held out her hand. Partners? Elias took her hand. Her grip was strong, calloused already from 5 days of ranch work. Partners. They stood there, hands clasped, while the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the stove. And for the first time since Clara had stepped off that train, Elias thought maybe this could actually work. The storm lasted 2 days. They spent the time trapped in the cabin together, and instead of fighting, they talked. Clara told him about growing up in Bavaria, about her father who'd been a music teacher, her mother who'd died when she was 12, the years she'd spent managing her father's household and teaching violin to wealthy children who didn't care about music. She told him about the engagement that had felt like a prison sentence, about the scandal when she broke it, about the long journey across the ocean with nothing but her violin and the clothes on her back. Elias told her about Texas, about working cattle drives since he was 14, about his parents dying in a cholera outbreak, about saving for 8 years to buy this land, about the woman who'd agreed to marry him, then took one look at the homestead and left without a word. Her loss, Clara said. Maybe. Definitely. Clara looked around the cabin. This place has good bones. It just needs someone who can see it. You see it? I'm starting to. On the third morning, the storm broke. They stepped outside into a world transformed. Everything white and clean, the sky hard blue, mountains sharp against the horizon. The cattle had survived, the barn had held, the homestead was intact. Clara stood in the yard, face tilted up to the sun, and smiled. It was the first time Elias had seen her smile, and it hit him like a kick to the chest. "We should get married," he said. Clara turned to look at him. "Now? Soon, properly, before the whole valley starts talking." "They're already talking." "Then let's give them something real to talk about." Clara walked over to him, boots crunching in the fresh snow. "If we do this, it's forever. I don't believe in quitting. Neither do I. And we build this place together, 50-50. 50-50, Elias agreed. Clara held out her hand again. Elias took it, and this time, when their eyes met, there was something new there. Not love exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it. The foundation. "All right," Clara said. "Let's do it." 2 weeks later, they stood in the small church in Livingston while Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony. Mrs. Harmon was there as witness, along with a handful of ranchers who'd come more out of curiosity than goodwill. Clara wore a simple blue dress. Elias wore his only suit, which he'd last worn to his parents' funeral. When the Reverend asked if he took Clara to be his wife, Elias said, "I do," and meant it down to his bones. When Clara said the same, her voice was clear and strong. They walked out of that church as husband and wife, and if the townspeople whispered about the strange arrangement, the mail-order bride who acted like she owned the place, the silent rancher who'd somehow found his voice, neither of them cared. They had work to do. And the Yellowstone Valley was about to learn that when Elias and Clara Mercer decided to build something, they didn't do it halfway. The spring thaw came late that year, brutal and sudden. Flathead Creek swelled over its banks, turning the low pasture into a muddy swamp. 2 calves got stuck and had to be pulled out by hand. The chicken coop flooded, and Clara spent an entire afternoon rebuilding it on higher ground, while Elias reinforced the barn's foundation. They worked dawn to dusk, slept hard, woke up, and did it again. And somewhere in the mud and exhaustion and endless labor, they stopped being strangers. They learned each other's rhythms. Elias learned that Clara was viciously efficient in the morning and useless after dark. Clara learned that Elias could work injured or sick without complaint, but if you wanted him to actually talk about it, you had to corner him at dinner. They learned to read each other's silences, the frustrated kind, the tired kind, the comfortable kind. They learned to fight productively. When Clara wanted to buy more chickens and Elias said they couldn't afford it, they argued for an hour, then sat down and actually looked at the numbers together. When Elias wanted to sell off half the herd and Clara said that was short-sighted, they argued, then worked out a compromise that involved expanding the grazing land instead. They learned to rely on each other. When a fence broke at midnight and the cattle started wandering, they both got up without discussion and fixed it together in the dark. When Clara got kicked by a horse and couldn't lift her left arm for 3 days, Elias took over the cooking without comment. When Elias came down with a fever that wouldn't break, Clara sat up with him for 2 nights straight, reading aloud from one of her books until he fell asleep. And slowly, so slowly Elias almost didn't notice, the cabin stopped feeling like his place that Clara was visiting. It became theirs. He built her the bookshelf he'd promised, spending evenings carving careful joints while Clara played her violin. He built a new bed, too, bigger, sturdy, with a real mattress stuffed with fresh straw. The first night they shared it, they lay on opposite sides, careful not to touch, both pretending to sleep. The second night was easier. By the 3rd week, Elias woke to find Clara curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, one hand fisted in his shirt. He didn't move, barely breathed, just lay there in the gray dawn light, feeling her warmth, listening to her breathe. When she woke and realized where she was, she froze. "Sorry," she mumbled, pulling away. "Don't be." Elias caught her hand. "I don't mind." Clara looked at him, really looked, searching his face for something. Then she settled back against him, cautious but deliberate. They didn't talk about it, but after that the space between them got smaller. Summer came to the Yellowstone Valley like a promise kept. The pastures turned green, the cattle fattened, the garden Clara had planted against Elias's skepticism came up thick with potatoes, carrots, beans. She sold eggs and vegetables to the widow Harmon, who sold them in town and came back with actual cash money. "We made a profit," Clara announced, slamming the coins on the table. Elias picked one up. "From vegetables?" "From my vegetables. That you said wouldn't grow. I said the soil wasn't great for vegetables. And I said you were wrong." Clara grinned at him, that smile that still hit like a surprise every time. "Admit it." "You were right," Elias said. "Say it louder." "You were right, and I was wrong, and you're a genius with vegetables." "Much better." Clara scooped up the coins. "I'm buying more chickens." "We don't need more chickens. We absolutely need more chickens, and maybe a milk cow." "Clara, a small milk cow." They argued about it for an hour, then went to town and bought 2 more chickens and a moderately sized milk cow that Clara named Greta and treated like royalty. That summer, people started stopping by the homestead more often, not just Mrs. Harmon, but other ranchers, neighbors who'd previously kept their distance from the silent, unfriendly Elias Mercer. They came with excuses, borrowing tools, asking advice about sick cattle, dropping off preserves, but really they came to see the change. Because everyone had heard about Clara Mercer, the mail-order bride who could outwork half the men in the valley, who'd reorganized Mercer's failing operation and turned it profitable, who played violin on the porch in the evenings and could argue fence construction like she'd been born to it. And they'd noticed something else. Elias Mercer was different. He talked now, not much, but enough. He smiled occasionally. He seemed less like a man waiting to die alone and more like a man who'd found something worth living for. At the summer social in Livingston, Clara danced with half the town while Elias watched from the sidelines, nursing a beer. When a young ranch hand got too friendly, putting his hands somewhere they shouldn't be, Elias crossed the room in 4 strides. "That's my wife," he said quietly. The ranch hand went pale and backed away fast. Clara appeared at Elias's elbow. "I can handle myself." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I wanted to." Elias looked at her. "That all right?" Clara's expression softened. "Yeah, that's all right." They danced once that night, awkward and stiff, neither of them any good at it. But Clara laughed when Elias stepped on her foot, and Elias laughed when she elbowed him in the ribs trying to turn, and people watching them saw something that made the gossips shut up for a while. They saw a marriage that was actually working. But nothing good comes without cost. Late August, a group of ranchers from the Southern Valley came to the homestead with a proposition. Their spokesman was a man named Dutch Keller, big, loud, the kind of man who thought the volume of his voice proved the strength of his argument. "Mercer," he boomed, dismounting in the yard like he owned the place. "We need to talk about the winter grazing situation." Elias, who'd been repairing a saddle on the porch, didn't look up. "Go ahead and talk." "There's not enough public land for all our herds. We're forming a coalition, controlled grazing rotation, managed access. Every rancher puts in, everyone benefits." "Not interested." "You haven't heard the terms yet." "Don't need to." Elias set down his tools. "I've got my own land. I'll manage it myself." Dutch's face reddened. "This is about being a good neighbor, Mercer." "Is it? Or is it about you wanting access to my creek water when yours runs dry? Now listen here." "You listen." Elias stood. "I built this place alone. I'll run it alone. You want water, dig your own well." The other ranchers shifted uncomfortably. Dutch looked like he wanted to throw a punch. Then Clara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who's this?" she asked. "Nobody," Elias said. "We're your neighbors," Dutch said, forcing charm into his voice. "Just trying to discuss business with your husband, ma'am." Clara looked at Elias. And I said no." "Why?" Dutch's eyes lit up. "Now that's a reasonable question. See, Mrs. Mercer, this is just about cooperation, sharing resources. Your husband's being unnecessarily difficult." "My husband's protecting our land," Clara said, "which is exactly what he should do." Dutch blinked. But nothing. You want water, Mr. Keller? Buy land with water on it. You want grazing rights? Buy grazing land. What you don't get to do is show up at our home and try to guilt us into handing over resources we worked for." "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand perfectly. Clara's voice went cold. You thought because Elias has a new wife, you could use me to manipulate him into a bad deal. You thought wrong. Now get off our property. The ranchers left. When they were gone, Elias looked at Clara. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. They were being assholes. She went back inside, then paused. Unless you actually wanted to join their coalition? Hell no. Good. Then we're on the same page. That night, lying in bed, Clara said, They'll hold a grudge. Probably. Won't bother you? Elias thought about it. 6 months ago, the answer would have been no. He didn't care what people thought. Didn't need their approval or friendship. But that was before Clara. Before he'd remembered what it felt like to have someone on his side. Only if it bothers you, he said. Clara rolled over to face him in the darkness. I didn't come here to be popular, Elias. No? No. I came here to build something real with someone real. She found his hand under the blankets. The rest of them can go to hell. Elias pulled her closer. Partners? Always. And when they kissed, it wasn't the first time. They'd been slowly, carefully figuring each other out for weeks. But it was the first time it felt like more than practice. It felt like choosing each other, deliberately, completely. The first real decision they'd made together that had nothing to do with cattle or money or survival. Just them. Bus sex. September came with brutal heat, then cold nights that hinted at the winter waiting just over the mountains. Elias and Clara worked frantically to prepare. Salting meat, storing vegetables, reinforcing structures, moving cattle to protected pastures. They worked well together now, moved like two parts of the same machine, anticipated each other's needs. The other ranchers noticed, some with respect, some with resentment. Dutch Keller's coalition went forward without them, and sure enough, by late October there were whispers of trouble, disputes over grazing boundaries, arguments about water access, the kind of tension that could turn neighbors into enemies fast. Elias kept his head down and focused on his own operation, but Clara saw the danger coming. It's going to get worse, she said one night over dinner, when winter hits and resources get tight. Not our problem. It will be when they decide to make it our problem. Elias looked at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we be careful. Watch our boundaries. Make sure they don't try to push cattle onto our land when things get desperate. You think they'd do that? I think desperate people do desperate things. Clara pushed food around her plate. We should talk to the widow Harmon. Make sure she's prepared too. She's got that small herd, and if Keller's coalition decides to absorb it, we're not getting involved in valley politics. We're already involved, Elias. We live here. She was right. Elias hated that she was right, but she was. So they visited Mrs. Harmon, who confirmed that yes, Dutch Keller had been sniffing around her property, suggesting she'd be safer joining the coalition, implying that bad things happened to people who tried to go it alone. What did you tell him? Clara asked. Mrs. Harmon smiled grimly. I told him my late husband had more backbone than Keller's entire family tree, and if he came onto my land again, I'd introduce him to the business end of a shotgun. Clara laughed. Good. They left with a promise to check on her regularly, to help if she needed it. That night, Elias said, We're building alliances. We're helping neighbors. Same thing. Clara looked at him. You object? No. Elias was quiet for a moment. 6 months ago I would have, but you're changing me. Into what? Someone who gives a damn. Clara kissed him. Good. The first snow came in early November, light and pretty. The serious storms would come later, but this was a warning. Time to finish preparations. Elias spent his days checking fence lines, moving cattle, stocking firewood. Clara spent hers preserving the last of the garden harvest, sewing warmer clothes, making sure they had enough supplies to last until spring. They worked hard, slept harder, and in the quiet moments between, they built something neither of them had expected. Not just a marriage of convenience, not just a business partnership, something real. Elias learned that Clara sang while she cooked, always off-key, always cheerful, that she read herself to sleep every night, that she was afraid of thunderstorms but would never admit it, that when she was worried, she reorganized things, shelves, drawers, the entire barn if she was stressed enough. Clara learned that Elias was gentle with animals in a way he never was with people, that he noticed everything but rarely commented, that he built things when he needed to think, fixed things that weren't broken, carved handles for tools that already had them, that he loved her violin playing even though he never said so out loud. They learned how to be married. Not perfectly. There were still arguments, still days when they got on each other's nerves. But they'd figured out the important thing. They were on the same side. Always. When Elias woke in the middle of the night from a nightmare about the cholera outbreak that killed his parents, Clara held him without asking questions. When Clara cried over a letter from Bavaria, from her sister, who wrote that their aunt had died and Clara hadn't been there, Elias sat with her in the silence until she was ready to talk. They were building a life. Together. And for the first time since he'd stepped onto this land 6 years ago, Elias could imagine a future that didn't feel empty. A future with Clara beside him. With children, maybe, someday. With something more than just survival. He didn't say any of this out loud. Didn't have the words for it yet. But when Clara looked at him across the cabin at night, violin in her lap, firelight catching in her hair, Elias thought maybe she knew anyway. And maybe that was enough. Winter was coming. They were ready. Or so they thought. The real winter hit 3 weeks before Christmas. Elias woke to a silence so complete it made his ears ring. No wind, no bird calls, nothing. He knew what that meant before he even opened his eyes. Beside him, Clara stirred. What is it? Snow. He got up and crossed to the window. What he saw made his stomach drop. Overnight, maybe 2 feet had fallen, and it was still coming down in thick, heavy flakes that erased the world beyond 50 yards. The barn was a gray ghost in the white. The fence line had disappeared completely. Jesus, Clara whispered, coming up behind him. We need to check the cattle. Now. They dressed fast, layering every piece of warm clothing they owned. Outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. The snow was already up to Elias's knees, and every step was a fight. Clara struggled behind him, using his tracks, her face already red from the wind that had started to pick up. The barn was chaos. The horses were spooked, stamping and rolling their eyes. The cattle that had made it inside were packed tight, steam rising from their bodies. But Elias counted heads and came up short. We're missing 12, he shouted over the wind. Where? North pasture. They must have bedded down before the storm hit. Clara's eyes went wide. We have to get them. It's too dangerous. They'll freeze to death. So will we if we go out there. They stared at each other. Then Clara grabbed a coil of rope from the wall. Then we tie ourselves together. If one of us goes down, the other can pull them back. Elias wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the cabin and go alone. But he'd learned enough about his wife to know that would just result in her following him anyway, probably without rope. Stay close, he said. And if I say we turn back, we turn back. Fine. They tied the rope around their waists, leaving maybe 20 feet between them. Then they headed into the white hell. The north pasture was only half a mile from the barn, but it might as well have been 50. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontal, erasing visibility down to nothing. Elias navigated by instinct and memory, trying to keep his bearings while Clara stumbled along behind him. He almost missed the first cow. Would have walked right past if she hadn't lowed, a pitiful, desperate sound. She was down, half buried in a drift, too weak to stand. 2 more were huddled nearby, shaking so hard their legs were about to give out. Help me get her up, Elias shouted. They worked together, pushing and pulling at the downed cow until she finally staggered to her feet. Clara grabbed the lead rope Elias kept coiled on his belt and tied it around the cow's neck. Then they moved to the others, got them roped together, and started the brutal slog back toward the barn. It took an hour to move 3 cattle, half a mile. By the time they got the animals secured in the barn, both of them were shaking from cold and exhaustion. But there were still 9 cattle out there. We're going back, Clara said. Clara, don't. She turned to face him, eyes fierce. Don't tell me it's too dangerous. Don't tell me to stay here. We're partners, remember? We do this together. Elias looked at his wife, at this woman who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, who'd crossed an ocean and married a man she didn't know, who was now willing to die in a blizzard for cattle that weren't even really hers yet. Together, he said, they made 3 more trips into that white nightmare. Found cattle one at a time, sometimes in pairs, pulled them from drifts, and half-dragged them back to safety. On the fourth trip, Clara went down hard, her foot catching on something hidden under the snow. Elias felt the rope go taut and turned to find her on her hands and knees, gasping. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "Can you stand?" She tried. Fell. Tried again. This time she made it, but Elias could see she was favoring her left leg. "We're done," he said. "There are still—" "Done, Clara. We've got 8 out of 12. That's better than nothing." For a moment he thought she'd fight him. Then she nodded, and they limped back to the barn together. Inside, they collapsed against a hay bale, both of them too exhausted to move. The cattle they'd saved stood around them, steam rising, alive because 2 stubborn people had refused to quit. "Your leg," Elias said when he could breathe again. "Twisted my ankle. It'll be fine." "Let me see." "Later. Right now, I just want to sit here and remember what warmth feels like." They sat there for maybe 20 minutes, listening to the wind scream outside, watching the snow pile up against the barn door. Then Clara said, "4 didn't make it." "No. That's money we can't afford to lose." "I know. But we couldn't save them all." "No." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "This is going to be a long winter, isn't it?" "Yeah." "Good thing I like you." Despite everything, Elias smiled. "Just like?" "Don't push your luck, Mercer." They made it back to the cabin as darkness fell. Clara's ankle was swelling bad, and Elias had to half-carry her the last 100 yards. Inside, he got the fire built up while Clara stripped off her wet clothes with shaking hands. "Sit," Elias ordered, pointing at the chair near the stove. For once, she didn't argue. He wrapped her in dry blankets, then knelt to examine her ankle. It was purple and swollen to twice its normal size. "Might be broken," he said. "It's not broken. I can move it." She demonstrated, then hissed in pain. "Mostly. You need to stay off it." "For how long?" "Few days at least." Clara looked horrified. "Elias, there's too much work." "I'll handle it." "You can't do everything alone. Watch me." He meant it. For the next 3 days, while the storm raged outside and Clara fumed from the cabin, Elias ran the entire operation himself. Fed the cattle, milked Greta, collected eggs, hauled water, chopped firewood, cooked meals that were barely edible. He worked until his body screamed, slept in 4-hour chunks, then got up and did it again. Clara tried to help, tried to cook from her chair, tried to mend clothes, tried to do anything to be useful. But her ankle was too bad, and every time she put weight on it, she went pale with pain. On the 3rd night, Elias came in to find her crying. He stopped in the doorway, snow falling from his coat. "Clara?" "I'm fine." She wiped her eyes angrily. "Just tired." "That's not it." "I said I'm fine." Elias crossed the cabin and crouched in front of her. "Talk to me." "I hate this," Clara said. Her voice cracked. "I hate being useless. I hate watching you work yourself to death while I sit here like some kind of invalid. I hate that I went down in the snow like a stupid, clumsy—" "Stop." Elias took her hands. "You're not useless. You saved 8 cattle. You worked harder than most men I know. And you went down because the conditions were impossible, not because you did anything wrong. But nothing. You're hurt. That happens. It doesn't make you weak." Clara looked at him with red eyes. "I'm supposed to be your partner." "You are my partner, which means sometimes I carry the weight while you heal, and sometimes you carry it while I heal. That's how this works." "I don't like being carried." "Yeah, well, I don't like carrying. Guess we're both learning to deal with things we don't like." Clara laughed, watery and rough. Then she pulled him close and kissed him hard. When they broke apart, she said, "I love you, you stubborn bastard." It was the first time either of them had said it. Elias felt something in his chest crack open. "I love you too." "Good." Clara wiped her eyes. "Now go wash up. You smell like a barn." "I've been in the barn for 3 days." Exactly my point. That night they lay in bed together while the wind howled outside. Clara's ankle was propped on a pillow, and Elias had one arm wrapped around her shoulders. "Tell me about Texas," Clara said. "What about it?" "Anything. I want to hear your voice." So Elias told her. About the cattle drives that lasted months. About sleeping under stars so thick you could read by them. About the men he'd worked with, hard men, most of them, but honest. About the time a stampede nearly killed him, and he'd walked away with nothing but bruises and a healthy respect for lightning. Clara listened, quiet and warm against his side. When he finished, she said, "You miss it." "Sometimes." "Why'd you stop?" "Got tired of moving. Wanted something permanent." He looked down at her. "Wanted this." "A cabin in the middle of nowhere with a wife who can't walk?" "A home. With you." Clara tilted her face up and kissed him. "You're getting dangerously sentimental, Mercer." "Blame the woman I married." "I will." By the end of the week, Clara's ankle had healed enough that she could hobble around the cabin. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a landscape transformed into white silence. Drifts 10 feet high blocked the road south. The creek was frozen solid. The world felt small and closed in. But they were alive. The cattle were alive. And somehow, they'd made it through the first real test of winter. Then the widow Harmon showed up. Elias saw her coming from a mile away, a dark figure struggling through the snow on snowshoes, moving slow. He met her halfway, already knowing something was wrong. "Dutch Keller," she gasped when she reached him. "He's trying to force me out." Back in the cabin, Mrs. Harmon explained while Clara made coffee. 3 days ago, during the worst of the storm, several of Keller's cattle had broken through her fence and eaten most of her winter hay stores. When she'd confronted him, he'd claimed it was an accident. Then he'd offered to buy her land for about a quarter of what it was worth. "And when I said no," Mrs. Harmon continued, "he said it was a shame. Said accidents happen all the time in winter. Fires, mostly. Terrible thing, a fire in weather like this." Clara's hand stopped moving. "He threatened you?" Not directly, but the meaning was clear. Elias felt rage building in his chest, cold and controlled, the way it always came. "You told the sheriff?" "Sheriff's in Keller's pocket. Everyone knows it." "Then what do you need from us?" Mrs. Harmon looked between them. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I just wanted to warn you. If Keller's willing to come after me, he'll come after you too eventually. You've got better land, better water." "Let him try," Clara said. "Clara," Elias started. "No." She turned to him. "We're not letting him bully people. Not Mrs. Harmon, not us, not anyone." "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we help. We share our hay with Mrs. Harmon to replace what Keller's cattle ate. We make sure she's protected, and we make it very clear that if Keller wants trouble, he'll get it." Mrs. Harmon shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, we're offering." Clara looked at Elias. "Right?" Elias thought about it. Thought about the smart play, which was keeping his head down and protecting his own operation. Thought about the safe play, which was staying out of valley politics like he'd always done. Then he thought about Clara going into that blizzard to save cattle, about her crying because she hated being useless, about the woman who'd crossed an ocean looking for something real. "We'll help," he said. Mrs. Harmon looked like she might cry. "You don't know what you're starting." "Yeah, we do," Clara said. "We're starting a fight, and we're going to win." Over the next 2 weeks, they implemented Clara's plan. Loaded up a wagon with hay and hauled it to Mrs. Harmon's place. Helped her reinforce her fences. Made sure she had enough firewood and supplies to last the winter. And Elias paid a visit to Dutch Keller. He found the big rancher in his barn directing workers. When Keller saw Elias, his expression went carefully neutral. "Mercer, what brings you out here?" "Heard you had some cattle get loose during the storm." "Yeah, unfortunate accident. Already offered to compensate the widow for the damages." "Is that what you call trying to buy her land for nothing?" Keller's jaw tightened. "That's between me and her." "Wrong." Elias stepped closer. "She's our neighbor, which makes it our business." "You want to be careful, Mercer. Making enemies out here is exactly what you're doing." Elias kept his voice low and level. "So here's how this works. You leave Mrs. Harmon alone. You keep your cattle off her land, and if I hear about any more accidents, I'm going to assume they're not accidents at all." That sounds like a threat. "It's a promise." They stared at each other. Finally, Keller said, "You're making a mistake. Standing against the coalition. I don't care about your coalition. I care about people trying to steal land from a widow because they're too lazy to manage their own operations properly. You self-righteous son of a—" "I'm done here." Elias turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, if anything happens to the widow or to my wife or to my land, I'll know exactly where to look. He walked out before Keller could respond. When he got home, Clara was waiting on the porch, bundled in blankets, ankle propped up. How'd it go? She asked. Made an enemy. Good. We need the practice. Elias sat beside her. You know this could get bad. I know. Keller's not going to back down easy. Neither will we. Clara, she turned to face him. Do you regret it? Helping her? Elias thought about it, about the safer path he could have taken, about the years he'd spent avoiding exactly this kind of confrontation. No, he said. I don't regret it. Then stop worrying. We'll handle whatever comes. Together? Always. Christmas came quiet and cold. They spent it in the cabin, just the two of them. Clara played her violin. German carols Elias didn't know, but that sounded like home. He'd carved her a small wooden box for her sheet music, spent weeks on it in secret. When she opened it, she cried. It's beautiful, she said. Not as beautiful as you. Now you're just being sappy. Can't help it. It's Christmas. They made love that night with the fire dying down and snow falling silent outside. And afterward, lying tangled together, Clara said, Next year, maybe we'll have someone else here with us. Elias went still. You mean, I don't know yet. It's too early to tell, but maybe. He pulled her closer, feeling something huge and terrifying and wonderful expanding in his chest. A child. Their child. The family he'd never thought he'd have. I hope so, he said. Me too. January brought more snow and temperatures that dropped so low, water froze inside the cabin if they let the fire die. The cattle huddled in the barn, and Elias spent hours each day breaking ice on the creek so they could drink. Clara, her ankle finally healed, helped where she could. But she tired easily, and Elias noticed she'd started being sick in the mornings. She didn't say anything, and neither did he. But they both knew. They were careful with each other, gentle. Elias took on more of the heavy work, and Clara didn't fight him on it. At night she'd fall asleep early, and he'd lie awake listening to her breathe, thinking about the future. Then, in mid-January, the trouble they'd been waiting for arrived. Elias woke to the smell of smoke. He was up and moving before his brain fully caught up, crossed to the window and saw flames, not at their cabin, but south, toward the widow's place. Clara, get up. She was already awake, pulling on clothes. How bad? Bad. They rode south through the darkness, horses fighting the snow. By the time they reached Mrs. Harmon's homestead, the barn was fully engulfed. The widow stood in the yard in her nightdress, screaming. Elias dismounted, running. Where are your horses? Still inside. How many? 2, but you can't. He was already moving. The heat hit him like a wall when he got close, and smoke choked his lungs. Behind him, Clara was shouting, but he couldn't hear over the roar of the flames. Inside the barn, it was hell, flames everywhere, smoke so thick he couldn't see. The horses were screaming, high, terrible sounds that would haunt him later. He found the first one by sound, got the stall open, drove it toward what he hoped was the exit. The second horse was harder, panicked, kicking, eyes rolling white. Elias got kicked twice trying to get the stall door open, finally got it loose and the horse bolted, nearly trampling him. He turned to get out and realized he couldn't see the door anymore. The smoke was too thick, the flames too bright. His lungs were burning, and his eyes streamed tears. Then a hand grabbed his arm. Clara, face wrapped in a wet cloth, pulled him through the inferno. They stumbled out together just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. They fell into the snow, coughing and gasping. Mrs. Harmon was crying, checking on her horses, both of which had survived. Elias's hands were burned, and Clara's hair was singed, but they were alive. It was Keller, Mrs. Harmon said. It had to be. Can you prove it? Clara asked. No, but who else? They stayed until dawn, making sure the fire was fully out and wouldn't spread to the cabin. Then they loaded Mrs. Harmon onto their wagon and took her home with them. I can't impose, she started. You're not imposing, Clara said firmly. You're staying with us until we figure this out. For the next week, Mrs. Harmon slept in their cabin while they worked to salvage what they could from her place. The barn was a total loss, but the cabin was intact. Most of her cattle had survived, but everyone in the valley knew what had happened, and everyone knew who was responsible, even if nobody could prove it. 3 days after the fire, Elias rode into Livingston and went straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a fat man named Wade, who'd been in Keller's pocket for years, listened to his report with barely concealed boredom. "Sounds like an accident," Wade said when Elias finished. "In the middle of the night? In winter? Happens. Lanterns get knocked over." Mrs. Harmon's lanterns were all accounted for. "Then maybe lightning." "There was no storm." Wade leaned back in his chair. "Look, Mercer, I understand you're upset, but unless you got proof, there's nothing I can do." "How much is Keller paying you?" Wade's expression hardened. "Careful." "How much?" "Get out of my office." "This isn't over, and—" "Yeah, it is." Wade stood up, hand on his gun. "And if you're smart, you'll stop making accusations you can't back up. Wouldn't want any more accidents happening." Elias left before he did something stupid, but the message was clear. They were on their own. When he got back to the homestead, he found Clara and Mrs. Harmon in the cabin talking in low voices. They stopped when he entered. "What?" he asked. Clara stood. "We've been discussing options." "What kind of options?" "The kind where we stop reacting and start acting." Mrs. Harmon looked uncomfortable. "Clara, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but nothing. Keller burned your barn, he threatened you, and the sheriff won't do anything about it." Clara looked at Elias. "So we need to make him stop." "How?" "By hitting him where it hurts, his wallet." Over the next hour, Clara laid out her plan. It was risky, probably illegal, definitely dangerous, but it might work. "You're talking about sabotage," Elias said when she finished. "I'm talking about justice." "Clara, don't." She crossed her arms. "Don't tell me it's too dangerous. Don't tell me to let it go. He burned a woman's barn in the middle of winter. He could have killed her, and he'll do it again if someone doesn't stop him." "And if we get caught?" "We won't. You can't know that." "You're right, I can't." Clara stepped closer. "But I know what happens if we do nothing. Keller wins, Mrs. Harmon loses everything, and next time it's our barn burning." Elias looked at his wife, at this woman who'd become fiercer than any man he'd known, who was probably carrying his child and still wanted to pick a fight with the most powerful rancher in the valley. "You're insane," he said. "Probably. You in?" Elias sighed. "Yeah, I'm in." Mrs. Harmon shook her head. "You two are going to get yourselves killed." "Maybe," Clara said, "but at least we'll die standing up." The plan was simple, which meant it was probably stupid. But simple was all they had. Keller's operation ran on credit and reputation. He'd borrowed heavily to expand his herd, counting on spring sales to pay off the loans. If something happened to damage that reputation, if buyers started having doubts about the quality of his cattle or his ability to deliver, the whole thing could collapse. Clara's idea was to make sure something happened. They spent 2 days preparing. Elias rode to Bozeman and had quiet conversations with cattle buyers he'd known from his driving days. Dropped hints about disease in Keller's herd. Nothing specific, nothing provable, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Meanwhile, Clara wrote letters. Anonymous letters, sent to every major rancher and buyer within 100 miles, suggesting that Keller's coalition was falling apart due to mismanagement and internal disputes, that cattle were being mixed improperly, that records were being falsified. Again, nothing provable. Just smoke. But where there was smoke, people assumed fire. By the end of the first week, Keller's buyers started pulling out. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to hurt. Enough to make the banks nervous about his loans, and Keller knew exactly who was responsible. Elias was in the barn when Keller arrived, 6 men riding with him. He heard the horses and walked out to meet them, rifle already in his hands, not pointed at anyone, just held, ready. "Mercer," Keller said. His voice was controlled, but his face was purple with rage. "We need to talk, so talk. Privately. Anything you've got to say, you can say in front of witnesses." Keller's jaw worked. Then he dismounted, gestured for his men to stay back. He walked up until he was maybe 10 feet from Elias. You're spreading lies about me, Keller said. Don't know what you're talking about. The hell you don't. Letters, rumors. Suddenly every buyer in Montana thinks my cattle are diseased. Are they? You know they're not. Elias shifted his grip on the rifle. Then you've got nothing to worry about. I'm losing contracts because of this, losing money. Shame about that. Keller took a step closer. Behind him, his men tensed. You think you're clever? You think I don't know this was you and that German bitch you married? The rifle came up fast, aimed at Keller's chest. Call her that again. Keller froze. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then he raised his hand slowly. Easy. Get off my land. Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of 6 witnesses? If I have to. You're not that stupid, Mercer. Try me. They stood there, locked in place. Then the cabin door opened and Clara stepped out. She was carrying Elias's spare rifle, and she pointed it at the nearest of Keller's men with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. He's not stupid, Clara said, but I might be. So I'd suggest you get back on your horse and leave before we find out. Keller looked between them. Then he smiled, cold and mean. This isn't over. No, Elias said. It's not. Keller remounted. Before he left, he turned back. You made a mistake making an enemy of me, both of you, and you're going to regret it. They rode out. Elias lowered the rifle, realized his hands were shaking. Clara came to stand beside him, still holding her gun. That went well, she said. He's going to come after us now. Let him. Clara, I'm serious. He's not going to just let this go. I know. She lowered her rifle. But what else were we supposed to do? Let him burn down half the valley? Elias didn't have an answer for that. That night, they took turns keeping watch. Elias took first shift, sitting in the dark cabin with his rifle across his knees, staring out the window at the snow-covered yard. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him jump. When Clara relieved him at midnight, she found him still wound tight as a spring. Sleep, she said. I've got this. I can stay up. You've been up for 20 hours. Sleep. He wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. He collapsed on the bed and was out in seconds. When he woke 4 hours later, Clara was still at the window, eyes red from strain but alert. Anything? He asked. Quiet. Too quiet, Elias thought, but he didn't say it. The next 2 weeks were tense. Every morning, Elias expected to find the barn burned or the cattle dead or some other disaster, but nothing happened. Keller stayed away. The valley stayed quiet. It made Elias more nervous than an attack would have. He's planning something, he told Clara one night. Obviously. Something big. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. But the waiting was eating at him. He couldn't sleep properly. Couldn't relax. Every noise made him reach for his rifle. Every stranger in town made him suspicious. Clara noticed. Of course she noticed. You're going to make yourself sick, she said. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're barely eating. You're not sleeping. You jump every time the wind blows. Because Keller's out there planning something. So what? Clara grabbed his shoulders, forced him to look at her. We can't live our whole lives waiting for the next attack. That's letting him win. I'm trying to keep us alive. I know, but you can't protect us if you collapse from exhaustion. She softened. I need you healthy, Elias. Our child is going to need you healthy. That stopped him. You're sure now? Clara nodded. Pretty sure. I'm nearly 3 months along. Elias pulled her close, felt the fear and tension drain out of him for just a moment, replaced by something else, something bigger and more terrifying than any threat from Keller. I'm going to be a father, he said. Looks that way. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. She pulled back to look at him. But first, we have to survive the next few months, which means you need to take care of yourself. She was right. Elias knew she was right, but knowing and doing were different things. February came with temperatures so cold the air hurt to breathe. The cattle suffered despite everything they did. 2 calves died overnight, frozen solid. Elias found them in the morning, covered in frost, and wanted to put his fist through something. Clara was there when he came back to the cabin, face grim. How many? She asked. 2. She closed her eyes. We can't afford to lose any more. I know. Maybe we should sell some of the herd. Cut our losses before more die. In this weather, we'd get nothing for them. Better than nothing at all. They argued about it for an hour, both of them exhausted and scared and trying not to show it. Finally, they agreed to wait until the weather broke. If they lost more cattle, they'd reconsider. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He lay in bed beside Clara, listening to her breathe, thinking about everything that could go wrong. The cattle dying, the baby coming too early, Keller making good on his threats, the homestead failing, all the weight of it pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe. He got up quietly, careful not to wake Clara, and went to sit by the fire. That's where she found him an hour later, staring into the flames. Can't sleep? She asked. No. Clara sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then she said, You want to know what I think about when I'm scared? What? I think about that first day. When I got off the train and saw you standing there looking like you'd swallowed nails, and I thought, what have I done? I've traveled across an ocean to marry an angry stranger who lives in the middle of nowhere. She smiled. I was terrified. Didn't show it. I was good at hiding it. She took his hand. But then I got to know you. And I realized you weren't angry. You were lonely and scared and trying so hard to build something real that you'd forgotten how to let anyone in. That's a nice way of saying I was a bastard. You were a bastard, Clara agreed, but you were my bastard. And somehow, we made it work. We built something neither of us thought we could have. Where are you going with this? I'm saying we've survived worse than Dutch Keller. We survived that first month when we hated each other. We survived the blizzard. We're surviving winter. We'll survive this too. Elias wanted to believe her, but the fear wouldn't let go. What if I can't protect you? Then I'll protect you. Clara, I'm serious. This isn't all on you, Elias. We're partners, remember? Which means when you're too tired or scared or overwhelmed to carry the weight, I'll carry it. And when I can't, you will. That's how this works. She made it sound so simple, so obvious. And maybe it was. Maybe he'd been so focused on being the protector, the provider, the one who had to be strong, that he'd forgotten they were supposed to do this together. I love you, he said. I know. I love you too. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. Now come back to bed. You need sleep. In a minute. Now. She pulled him to his feet. That's an order from your partner. Since when do you give orders? Since always. You just haven't been paying attention. They went back to bed. This time, Elias slept. The break came from an unexpected direction. A rancher named Thomas Brennan, who'd been part of Keller's coalition but had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the man's tactics, showed up at their homestead in early March. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected to be followed. I need to talk to you, he told Elias. They sat in the cabin. Clara made coffee while Brennan fidgeted with his hat. Keller's planning something, Brennan said. Something big. We figured that much, Clara said, setting down cups. No, you don't understand. He's not just going after you. He's going after everyone who won't join the coalition. You, the widow, 3 other small ranchers. He's got it all planned out. Elias leaned forward. What's he planning? I don't know exactly, but I heard him talking to some men. Hired men, not ranchers. The kind of men you hire when you want something done quiet and permanent. You mean killers, Clara said. Brennan nodded miserably. I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted better grazing coordination. I didn't want people getting hurt. Why are you telling us this? Because what he's doing is wrong, and because my wife would kill me if I let him hurt the widow Harmon. Brennan looked at them. She's my wife's aunt. I can't just stand by. Elias studied the man. Brennan looked sincere, but Elias had learned the hard way that sincerity didn't mean much when violence was on the table. Still, if he was telling the truth, they needed to know. When? Elias asked. I don't know. Soon, I think. Before the thaw makes it easier for people to travel, while everyone's still isolated. Who else knows about this? Just me, far as I know. The other coalition members, they're just greedy. They don't know Keller's hiring guns. Clara and Elias exchanged looks. Then Clara said, What do you want from us? I don't want anything. I just wanted to warn you. Brennan stood. Be careful, and watch your backs." After he left, Elias and Clara sat in silence for a long moment. "We need help," Clara said finally. "From who?" "The sheriff's bought. The coalition won't stand against Keller. Most of the valley's too scared to get involved." "Then we get help from outside the valley." "Clara!" "I'm serious. We send a word to the territorial marshal. We document everything Keller's done. The barn burning, the threats, the hired guns. We make this official." "And how long do you think that will take? Weeks? Maybe months?" "We don't have that kind of time." "Then what do you suggest?" Elias thought about it, about all the choices that had led them here, about the moment he decided to help Mrs. Harmon instead of keeping his head down, about Clara's plan to hit back at Keller, about the fact that sometimes when the law wouldn't help you, you had to help yourself. "We gather everyone he's targeting," Elias said. "We make a plan, and we hit him first." Clara smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Now you're thinking like me." Over the next week, they quietly contacted the other ranchers Brennan had mentioned, brought them to the homestead one at a time, explained the situation. Some were skeptical, some were scared, but all of them agreed that waiting for Keller to make his move was suicide. "So what's the plan?" asked Jacob Miller, a young rancher from the East Valley. Elias looked around the cabin. 7 people crowded into the small space, all of them looking at him like he had answers. He didn't, but he had Clara, who was standing beside him with her arms crossed, looking determined. "We stop him," Elias said. "Permanently." "You mean kill him?" Mrs. Harmon sounded shocked. "I mean we destroy his operation, legally. We gather evidence of everything he's done, we document it, and we take it to the territorial government ourselves, bypass the local sheriff entirely." "That could take weeks," Miller said. "Got a better idea?" Nobody did. They spent the rest of the night planning, assigning tasks, figuring out who would document what. Clara would handle the written evidence, compiling all the incidents into a formal complaint. Miller knew a lawyer in Helena who might help. Mrs. Harmon had records of the hay theft and the barn fire. It wasn't much, but it was something. As everyone was leaving, Brennan pulled Elias aside. "There's something else you should know." "What?" "The men Keller hired. I heard a name. Frank Dutton." Elias felt his stomach drop. "You're sure?" "That's what I heard." "You know him?" "Yeah, I know him." After everyone left, Clara found Elias sitting at the table, head in his hands. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Frank Dutton." "Who's that?" "Someone I knew in Texas. Worked cattle drives with him for 2 years." Elias looked up. "He's a killer. Real one. Probably killed a dozen men, maybe more. And he's good at it." Clara went pale. "Keller hired him?" "Apparently." "Then we need to move faster." "Clara, you don't understand. Dutton doesn't just kill people. He makes it look like accidents. Cliff falls, hunting mishaps, fires." Elias stood, started pacing. "If he's here, if he's really working for Keller, we're in serious trouble." "Then what do we do?" "I don't know." "Elias, I don't know." He slammed his hand on the table, made Clara jump. Immediately he regretted it. "Sorry, I'm sorry." Clara came over, took his hands. "We'll figure it out, together." But for the first time since they'd started this fight, Elias wasn't sure they could. The next morning, he rode into Livingston alone. Told Clara he was checking on supplies, but really he was looking for information. He found it in the saloon, where a bartender he'd known for years told him that, yes, Frank Dutton had been in town 3 days ago. Staying at the hotel, drinking alone, asking questions about local ranchers, asking questions about Elias Mercer specifically. Elias rode home faster than he should have, the horse laboring through the snow. He got back to find Clara in the yard talking to a stranger. The man was tall, lean, with a face that looked carved from old leather. He wore a long coat and a gun on his hip, and when he turned to look at Elias, his eyes were dead and empty. Frank Dutton. Elias dismounted slowly, hand moving toward his rifle. "Clara, get in the house." "He said he's an old friend," Clara said, but she was already backing away, reading the tension in Elias's posture. "We're not friends," Elias said. "Never were." Dutton smiled. "That's harsh, Elias. We rode together for 2 years. And I found out what you really were. That's when we stopped riding together. Still holding a grudge over that rustler in Fort Worth? He was stealing cattle. He was a kid, 15 years old. You shot him in the back. He was armed.
He was running away.
Dutton shrugged. Ancient history. I'm here on business. I know what business. Keller sent you. Actually, I'm here to deliver a message. Dutton pulled a piece of paper from his coat. For Mr. Keller. He wants to make a deal. Elias didn't take the paper. What kind of deal? Simple one. You stop spreading lies about his operation. You stop interfering with his business. And in return, he doesn't pursue legal action against you for slander and defamation. That's not a deal, that's a threat. Call it what you want. But Mr. Keller's being generous. He could have just handled this differently. You mean the way you usually handle things? Dutton's smile widened. I'm just delivering a message. What you do with it is up to you. Get off my land. Now, Elias, that's no way to treat an old friend. We're not friends. And if you're still here in 10 seconds, I'm going to shoot you. You wouldn't do that, not in front of your pretty wife. Clara had moved to the porch. Now she raised Elias's spare rifle, pointed it at Dutton. He might not. I will. Dutton looked between them, still smiling. Then he dropped the paper in the snow. Think about it. You've got 3 days to accept. After that, Mr. Keller's offer expires. He mounted his horse and rode out, taking his time, making it clear he wasn't afraid. When he was gone, Clara lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking. That was him? Yeah. He's terrifying. Yeah. They went inside. Elias built up the fire while Clara made coffee, both of them needing something to do with their hands. Finally, Clara said, What are we going to do? What we planned. Gather evidence. Go to the territorial government. We don't have 3 days for that. Then we'll have to make a decision. Clara set down her cup. What kind of decision? Elias looked at her. At his wife, carrying his child, standing in the cabin they'd built together. The life they'd created from nothing. Everything he'd never thought he'd have. We can leave, he said. Sell the homestead. Move somewhere Keller's reach doesn't extend. Start over. Run away. Survive. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Is that what you want? I want you safe. I want our child safe. That's not what I asked. Elias stood, walked to the window. Outside, the valley stretched white and endless. The land he'd bought with 8 years of wages, the home he'd built with his own hands, the future he'd imagined. No, he said, it's not what I want. Then we stay. Clara came to stand beside him. We fight, and we win. Clara, Dutton will kill us. Maybe, or maybe we're smarter than he thinks. This isn't a game. I know that. She turned to face him. But I also know that if we run now, we'll be running forever. Every time someone threatens us, we'll fold. Every time things get hard, we'll quit. That's not the life I want. And I don't think it's the life you want either. She was right. Again. Always. All right, Elias said. We fight. Together? Together. They had 3 days. It wasn't enough time, but it would have to be. The first thing they did was send word to all the ranchers they'd gathered, warned them about Dutton, told them to be careful, watch their backs. Miller said he'd ride to Helena immediately, try to get help from the territorial marshal. The second thing was to fortify the homestead. They moved supplies into the cabin, stocked extra ammunition, made sure every window had a clear line of fire. Elias brought the cattle in closer, where he could watch them. The third thing was the hardest. They talked about what would happen if things went wrong. If something happens to me, Elias said, you take the money from the hidden box behind the stove. You take the horses, and you go to Bozeman. There's a man there, Sam Hartley, used to ride with me. He'll help you. Nothing's going to happen to you, Clara said. If it does, it won't. Clara, please, just promise me. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, All right, I promise. But only if you promise me something. What? If something happens to me, you don't do anything stupid. You don't go after Keller alone. You don't get yourself killed for revenge. You take care of our child. The thought of losing her made Elias's chest tight. I promise. They held each other that night, neither of them sleeping much. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow looked like Dutton coming back. But morning came quiet, and the day after that. On the third day, Elias rode into town. Clara wanted to come, but he made her stay behind. If Dutton was waiting to make his move, Elias wanted Clara as far from the danger as possible. Livingston was quiet. Snow fell light and steady. Elias hitched his horse outside the general store and went in, bought supplies he didn't really need. Just wanted to be seen. Wanted Keller and Dutton to know he wasn't hiding. He was coming out when he saw them. Dutch Keller and Frank Dutton standing in front of the saloon, watching him. Elias walked over, slow, deliberate. "Time's up, Mercer," Keller said. "What's your answer?" "No deal." Keller's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "So you keep saying." "Last chance." "Still no." Dutton stepped forward. "You sure about that, Elias? Think about that pretty wife of yours." Elias's hand moved to his gun. "You go near her, I'll kill you." "Big talk from a man who's outnumbered." "I'm not afraid of you, Frank." "Maybe you should be." They stood there, hand on guns, while the street cleared, people ducking into buildings, watching from windows. Everyone knew what was happening, what was about to happen. Then Sheriff Wade came running up. "Now hold on, nobody's drawing any guns in my town." "Your town?" Elias said. "This is Keller's town. You just live in it." Wade's face went red. "That's enough, Mercer." "Is it? You going to arrest me for telling the truth?" "I'm going to arrest you if you don't move along." "Arrest him?" Keller laughed. "Sheriff, the man just threatened to kill someone in front of witnesses." "Did I?" Elias looked at Dutton. "I thought I was just making conversation." "Sounded like a threat to me," Dutton said. This was spiraling. Elias could feel it. In another minute, someone was going to draw, and once that happened, people would die. He stepped back, raised his hands. "I'm leaving." "Smart choice," Keller said. Elias mounted his horse. Before he rode out, he looked at Keller one more time. "This isn't over." "No," Keller said. "It's not." Elias rode home fast. When he got there, Clara was waiting in the yard, rifle in hand. "What happened?" "They wanted me to draw. I didn't." "That was smart." "Was it? Because now they know we're not backing down, which means they'll come for us." "Then we'll be ready." They spent the evening preparing, loading guns, checking ammunition, going over the plan for if someone attacked in the night. Elias kept looking at Clara, at the way she moved around the cabin, efficient and determined, at the slight swell of her belly that was just starting to show. "Maybe you should go to Mrs. Harmon's," he said. "No." "Clara, I said no. We're partners. Where you are, I am." "Even if it gets you killed?" "Even then." They were still arguing about it when they heard horses. Multiple horses. Coming fast. Elias grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Outside in the darkness, he could see shapes moving. Men on horseback surrounding the cabin. Then a voice called out, "Mercer, we need to talk!" It wasn't Keller or Dutton. It was Thomas Brennan. Elias opened the door cautiously. Brennan was there, along with 5 other men from the coalition, all of them armed. "What's going on?" Elias asked. "Keller's planning to hit you tonight," Brennan said. "Dutton and 4 hired guns. They're coming from the South Road." "How do you know?" "Because I was there when he gave the order." Brennan dismounted. "I'm done, Mercer. I'm done pretending this is about grazing rights. I'm done watching him terrorize people, and I'm done being on the wrong side." The other men nodded. One of them said, "We all are." Elias looked at them. 6 men. Not much against Dutton and 4 killers. But it was more than he had. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. "Because my wife threatened to leave me if I didn't help her aunt," Brennan said. "And because you're right. About everything. Keller's out of control. And someone needs to stop him." Clara appeared behind Elias. "They're telling the truth. How do you know?" "Because they're here. If they wanted to help Keller, they'd just wait for him to attack." She was right. Elias stepped aside. "All right, come in. We've got work to do." They had maybe an hour before Dutton arrived. It wasn't much time, but they used it well. Set up positions, created firing lanes, moved the horses to safety. When they were ready, Elias looked around at the men who'd chosen to stand with them. Brennan and his friends. Clara with her rifle. the life they'd built together, now about to be tested by fire. "Whatever happens," Elias said, "thank you for coming. Thank us if we survive," Brennan said. Then they waited, in the darkness, in the cold. For the violence they all knew was coming. They came at midnight. Elias saw them first, shadows moving against the snow. 5 riders approaching from the south, exactly like Brennan had said. They weren't trying to hide, weren't trying to be quiet. That worried him more than anything. Dutton didn't need to sneak. He knew what he was doing. "Positions," Elias said quietly. The men scattered, Brennan and 2 others to the barn, 2 more behind the woodpile. Clara stayed in the cabin with Elias, both of them at opposite windows, rifles ready. The riders stopped maybe 50 yards out. Dutton's voice carried across the cold air. "Elias Mercer, come out and talk." Elias didn't move, didn't respond. "I know you're in there, and I know you got friends with you. Saw Brennan's horse out back." Dutton laughed. "That's fine, more the merrier." Still, Elias waited. "Here's how this goes," Dutton called. "You got 2 choices. You and your wife come out now, get on horses, and ride out of the valley. Leave everything behind, or we come in and take you out. Your choice." Clara looked at Elias across the dark cabin. "We're not leaving." "I know." "So what do we do?" Before Elias could answer, gunfire erupted from the barn. Brennan had opened up on the riders, catching one of them in the shoulder. The man screamed and fell from his horse. Then all hell broke loose. Dutton and his men scattered, returning fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. Bullets punched through the barn walls, through the cabin windows. Elias and Clara dropped to the floor as glass shattered above them. "You all right?" Elias shouted. "Fine, stay down!" Elias crawled to the window, raised his rifle, and fired at a shadow moving near the barn. Missed. Fired again. This time the shadow went down. More gunfire from the woodpile. One of Brennan's men was shooting steady and controlled, pinning down Dutton's people behind their horses. But Dutton himself had disappeared. That made Elias's skin crawl. "Where is he?" Clara asked. "I don't know." The shooting continued for maybe 5 minutes, then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell across the yard, broken only by the moaning of the wounded man Brennan had shot. Elias scanned the darkness, looking for movement. Nothing. Then smoke started rising from the barn. "No!" Brennan shouted from inside. "No, no, no!" Fire. Dutton had circled around and set the barn on fire. "Get out of there!" Elias yelled. Brennan and his men came running out, silhouetted against the flames. Dutton's remaining gunmen opened fire immediately. One of Brennan's friends went down hard. Didn't get up. Brennan made it to the cabin, crashed through the door, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "He's burning everything. How many men does he have left?" 3, maybe 4. I hit one for sure. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching high into the night sky. The cattle inside were screaming terrible, inhuman sounds. Elias felt sick. "We have to get them out," Clara said. "It's too late." Elias. "It's too late." He grabbed her shoulders. "The barn's gone. If we go out there, we're dead too." Clara looked at him with tears streaming down her face. Then she pulled away and raised her rifle. "Then we make him pay for it." She moved to the window and started firing, methodical, controlled. Every shot aimed at the muzzle flashes from Dutton's men. Elias joined her. So did Brennan and the others who'd made it to the cabin. They poured fire into the darkness, and slowly, Dutton's men stopped shooting back. Either they were dead or they'd retreated. The barn burned for another hour. They watched from the cabin windows, helpless, as years of work turned to ash. The cattle, the hay stores, the equipment, everything. When the fire finally died down, the sky was starting to lighten. Dawn was coming. "Is it over?" Brennan asked. "No," Elias said. "Dutton's still out there." "How do you know?" "Because he wouldn't leave a job unfinished." As if to prove the point, a bullet smashed through the window, missing Clara's head by inches. She dropped to the floor. "Still here, Elias," Dutton shouted from somewhere out in the darkness. "And I'm not going anywhere until we finish this." Elias helped Clara up. "You hit?" "No, but that was close." She was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "I'm going to kill him myself. Get in line." Another bullet hit the cabin wall. Then another. Dutton was playing with them now, showing he could hit them whenever he wanted. "We can't stay here," Brennan said. "Eventually, he'll just burn the cabin too." "So what do you suggest?" "I go out there, draw his fire, give you a chance to flank him." "That's suicide." "You got a better idea?" Elias didn't. He looked at Clara, who was reloading her rifle with shaking hands. At Brennan, bleeding and exhausted but still ready to fight. At the other men huddled in the cabin, scared but holding their ground. "There's another way," Elias said slowly. "What?" "Dutton knows me, knows how I think, so I give him what he expects." Elias stood. "I go out the front. Make it look like I'm trying to run. He'll focus on me. While he's distracted, the rest of you hit him from the sides." Clara grabbed his arm. "That's insane. It's the only way." "Then I'm coming with you." "Clara, you're pregnant." "I don't care." Her eyes were fierce. "We're partners. You go. I go." They stared at each other. Then Elias nodded. "All right. Together." Brennan started to object, but Elias cut him off. "Get into position. Give us 2 minutes, then open fire on wherever he's shooting from. Don't stop until you're sure he's down. And if we hit you by mistake, try not to." Elias and Clara moved to the back door. Elias's heart was hammering so hard he could hear it. This was stupid, reckless, everything Clara had accused him of being when they'd first met, but it might work. "On 3, he said. 1, 2. The door exploded inward. Dutton had circled around. He came through the doorway fast, gun already firing. Elias threw himself sideways, felt a bullet tug at his coat. Clara screamed and fired her rifle, the shot going wild. Dutton turned toward her. Elias saw it happening in slow motion. Saw Dutton's gun swing around. Saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Elias shot him. The bullet caught Dutton in the chest, spun him around. But the man didn't go down. Instead, he turned back, grinning through bloody teeth. "That all you got, Elias?" He raised his gun again. Elias fired. So did Clara. So did Brennan from across the room. 3 bullets hit Dutton almost simultaneously, and finally, he fell. The silence afterward was deafening. Elias stood there, rifle still pointed at Dutton's body, waiting for him to move. But the man was dead. Really dead this time. Claire was beside him, breathing hard. "Is it over?" "Yeah, it's over." Outside they could hear shouting. Dutton's remaining men were running. Brennan's friends were chasing them, but Elias didn't care anymore. He was too tired, too numb. He looked at the cabin. Bullet holes everywhere. Windows shattered, door hanging off its hinges. Then he looked out at what was left of the barn. Just smoking timber and ash. Everything they'd built. Everything they'd worked for. Gone. Clara followed his gaze. "We'll rebuild." "With what money?" "The cattle are dead. The barn's gone." "Then we'll figure something else out." Clara, "No." She turned to face him. "We've survived worse. We'll survive this too." Elias wanted to believe her, but standing there in the ruins of everything they'd built, it was hard to see how. The next 3 days were a blur. They buried the dead, one of Brennan's men who died in the first volley, and Dutton's body, which nobody wanted to touch but had to be dealt with. The territorial marshal finally showed up, 2 days too late, and took statements from everyone. He arrested what was left of Dutton's crew and took them back to Helena for trial. Dutch Keller, predictably, claimed he knew nothing about the attack. Said Dutton must have been acting independently. The marshal didn't believe him, but without proof, there was nothing he could do. "He'll get away with it," Clara said bitterly. "Maybe not," the marshal said. "I'm opening a full investigation, and with Brennan and the others willing to testify about the coalition's activities, I might be able to build a case. Might. It's better than nothing, ma'am." After the marshal left, Elias and Clara stood in the yard, looking at the wreckage. The burned barn. The frozen cattle carcasses they'd have to deal with soon. The cabin that needed repairs they couldn't afford. "What do we do now?" Clara asked. Elias didn't have an answer. That night they lay in bed, both too exhausted to sleep. Clara's hand rested on her belly, and Elias put his hand over hers. "Baby's still moving," she said. "Good. We're going to be all right, Elias." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "How do you know?" Clara rolled over to face him. "Because we're still here. We're still together, and that's all that matters." Elias pulled her close. I'm sorry. For what? For all of this. For getting you involved in this fight. For losing everything we built. You didn't lose it. They took it. There's a difference. Clara kissed him. And they didn't take everything. They didn't take us. She was right. She was always right. The help came from unexpected places. First, Mrs. Harmon showed up with food, preserved vegetables, canned meat, bread she'd baked herself. It's not much, she said, but it's what I can spare. Then Jacob Miller arrived with lumber. Had some extra from a project that didn't pan out. Figured you could use it more than me. Brennan came with his entire family. His wife brought blankets and clothes. His sons helped clear away the burned barn debris. And he handed Elias an envelope full of cash. What's this? Elias asked. Everyone in the valley contributed, even some of the coalition members who feel bad about what happened. Brennan looked embarrassed. It's not enough to replace what you lost, but it's a start. Elias stared at the money. I can't take this. Yes, you can. You stood up to Keller when nobody else would. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves. This is the valley saying thank you. Clara appeared beside Elias. We'll pay it back. No need, just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being stubborn and brave and refusing to back down. Brennan smiled. Valley needs more people like you. Over the next 2 weeks, more people came. Ranchers who'd been too scared to stand up to Keller before, but who found courage after seeing what Elias and Clara had done. They brought supplies, labor, support, and slowly, impossibly, the homestead started to come back to life. They built a new barn, smaller than the old one but solid, used the money from the valley to buy new cattle, not as many as they'd had, but enough to start rebuilding the herd, repaired the cabin, replaced the windows, fixed the door. It wasn't the same, would never be the same, but it was something. Clara worked beside Elias every day, even as her pregnancy progressed. He tried to make her rest, but she was as stubborn as ever. I'm pregnant, not dead, she said when he objected to her hauling water. You could hurt yourself. I'm fine. Clara, I said I'm fine. But her eyes softened. I appreciate you worrying, but I need to do this. I need to help rebuild what we lost. So Elias stopped arguing and just made sure to keep an eye on her, made sure she didn't overdo it, made sure she took breaks even when she insisted she didn't need them. And at night, when they collapsed into bed exhausted, he held her and felt their child move under his hand and thought about the future they were building. Not the future they'd planned, but maybe something better. March turned into April. The snow started to melt, revealing the muddy earth underneath. The creek swelled with runoff. Birds returned, filling the valley with sound. And Dutch Keller made his move. Not with violence this time. He'd learned that lesson. Instead, he went legal. He filed a lawsuit claiming that the rumors Elias and Clara had spread about his operation had caused him financial damages. Demanded compensation. Demanded that they cease and desist all negative statements about him or his coalition. He's trying to bankrupt us, Clara said, reading the legal papers. Can he do that? If he wins the suit, yeah, we'd owe him more money than we could ever pay. Elias felt rage building in his chest. After everything he's done, after he burned our barn and killed our cattle, he's suing us? Apparently. That's not right. No, but it might be legal. They took the papers to the lawyer Miller had recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen who'd dealt with men like Keller before. He's got a weak case, Chen said after reviewing everything. But weak doesn't mean winnable. If you can't afford a good defense, he might win by default. What do we need? Elias asked. Money and evidence? Lots of both. They didn't have much of either. That night Clara sat at the table writing furiously. Elias watched her, confused. What are you doing? Writing everything down, every incident, every threat, every piece of evidence we have that Keller's a crook. She looked up. We're going to fight this, not just defend ourselves, but go after him. Countersue for the barn, the cattle, everything. Clara, we can't afford. We'll find a way. We always do. Over the next month, Clara became obsessed. She documented everything, interviewed everyone, built a case against Keller that was so thorough it made the lawyer's eyes light up. This is good, Chen said. This is really good. With this evidence, we might actually win. Might? Litigation is unpredictable, but you've got a solid case for damages. And if the territorial marshal's investigation turns up criminal charges, that'll help your civil case too. The trial was set for June. That gave them 2 months to prepare. 2 months of stress and worry and sleepless nights. 2 months of Clara getting bigger, moving slower, but refusing to stop working on the case. 2 months of Elias trying to keep the ranch running while watching his wife wear herself down to nothing. "You need to rest," he told her one night. "I will, after the trial. The baby is fine. The doctor checked last week." "Clara, please." She looked up from her papers. "What?" "I'm scared." "Of the trial? Of losing you? Of something happening to the baby? Of all of this being too much?" Clara set down her pen and came to him, took his face in her hands. "Hey, look at me." He did. "We're going to be fine," she said. "The trial, the baby, all of it. We're going to be fine." "You can't know that." "Yes, I can, because we've survived everything else, and we'll survive this too." She kissed him. "Together." "Together," Elias echoed. But the fear didn't go away. May brought warm weather and new calves. The herd was growing again. The garden Clara had planted was coming up thick and green. The homestead was starting to look like a real operation again. And Clara was getting close, really close. The baby wasn't due until July, but everyone said first babies came early. Elias found himself watching her constantly, worried about every wince, every tired sigh. "You're hovering," Clara said. "I'm concerned." "You're driving me crazy." "I'm trying to take care of you." "I don't need taking care of. I need you to stop looking at me like I'm made of glass." They argued about it constantly. Clara wanted to keep working on the trial preparation. Elias wanted her to rest. Neither of them would back down. Finally, Mrs. Harmon intervened. "You two are going to argue yourselves to death," she said, marching into the cabin uninvited. "Clara, you need to slow down. Elias, you need to stop treating her like an invalid. Both of you need to remember you're on the same side." They stared at her. "Now, Clara, you're going to let me help with the trial paperwork. And Elias, you're going to focus on the ranch and stop micromanaging your wife's pregnancy. Agreed?" "Agreed," they said in unison. Mrs. Harmon smiled. "Good. Now, Clara, show me what you've been working on." With Mrs. Harmon's help, the trial preparation became manageable. Clara could focus on the big picture while the widow handled the details. And Elias could breathe again, knowing his wife wasn't doing everything alone. The trial started the first week of June, in the courthouse in Livingston. The whole valley showed up to watch. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a public reckoning. Keller sat at the plaintiff's table, looking confident and well-dressed. His lawyer was expensive, slick, the kind of man who could make lies sound like truth. Elias and Clara sat at the defense table with Margaret Chen. Clara's belly was huge now, and she looked exhausted, but her eyes were fierce. "You ready?" Chen asked. "Let's finish this," Clara said. The trial lasted 3 days. Keller's lawyer painted Elias and Clara as troublemakers who'd spread malicious lies to damage a respected businessman's reputation. Presented financial documents showing the losses Keller had suffered. Made it sound like they were vindictive outsiders attacking a pillar of the community. Then it was Chen's turn. She dismantled Keller piece by piece, brought out witness after witness, ranchers he'd threatened, people he'd cheated, the widow Harmon with her story about the barn fire. Presented Clara's meticulously documented evidence of every crime, every threat, every abuse of power. And she brought up Dutton, the hired killer, the attack on the Mercer homestead. "Mr. Keller claims he knew nothing about this," Chen said, "but the evidence shows a pattern of intimidation and violence against anyone who opposed his coalition. The evidence shows that Frank Dutton was hired by Mr. Keller specifically to eliminate opposition. And the evidence shows that when legal methods failed, Mr. Keller resorted to murder." Keller's lawyer objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. On the third day, the territorial marshal testified. Said his investigation had turned up evidence of criminal conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Said charges were being filed against Keller and several of his associates. The courtroom erupted. When the judge finally restored order, he looked at Keller with pure contempt. "I'm dismissing the plaintiff's suit," he said, "and I'm awarding damages to the defendants in the amount of $5,000 to be paid by Mr. Keller for the destruction of their property. Keller shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. I demand—" "You're in no position to demand anything, Mr. Keller. In fact, given the marshal's testimony, I'm ordering you to remain in the jurisdiction pending criminal charges. Bail is set at $10,000. Keller went pale. They'd won. Outside the courthouse, people mobbed them, congratulating them, thanking them. Brennan was grinning like a fool. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "We all did it," Clara said. "Everyone who stood up, everyone who testified. Still, you started it, you and Elias." Brennan shook their hands. "The Valley won't forget this." Elias and Clara walked back to the wagon together. Clara was moving slow, one hand on her belly. "You all right?" Elias asked. "Just tired and ready for this to be over." "It is over. The trial is, but we've still got a baby coming, and a ranch to rebuild, and a whole life ahead of us." Elias helped her into the wagon. "Think we can handle it?" Clara smiled. "I know we can." They rode home as the sun set, painting the valley gold and red. The homestead came into view, the new barn, the repaired cabin, the green fields stretching toward the mountains. Home. Not perfect, not what they'd imagined, but real. And theirs. "I love you," Elias said. "I love you too." That night they celebrated. Mrs. Harmon brought food. Miller and Brennan and their families showed up. Half the valley came to congratulate them and share in the victory. And Clara, exhausted and pregnant and triumphant, played her violin. The music filled the cabin and spilled out into the night. German songs and American songs and songs Elias had never heard. Songs of home and loss and hope. People danced, laughed, forgot for a while about the hard winter and the violence and the fear. And Elias stood in the doorway, watching his wife play, watching their friends celebrate, watching the life they'd built together shine in the lamplight. This was what he'd wanted when he'd ordered a mail-order bride. Not obedience, not quiet, not someone to cook and clean and disappear into the background. This. Partnership, love, a life worth fighting for. Clara caught his eye and smiled. And in that moment, with music filling the air and their child moving in her belly and their future stretching out bright and uncertain, Elias knew they were going to be all right. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The celebration went late into the night. When the last guests finally left, Elias and Clara stood in the yard, looking up at the stars. "Big day tomorrow," Clara said. "Why?" "Because tomorrow we start rebuilding, for real this time. Not just recovering from what Keller destroyed, but building something new, something better. With a baby on the way, especially with a baby on the way." Clara turned to face him. "Our child's going to grow up here, Elias, on this land, in this valley, and I want them to see what we built, what we fought for. They will. Promise?" "I promise." They went inside. The cabin was a mess from the party, but neither of them cared. They fell into bed exhausted and happy. And tomorrow they'd start again, together, always together. The baby came 3 weeks early, on a morning so hot the air shimmered. Clara had been working in the garden despite Elias's protests, picking the last of the early peas. She straightened up, hand on her back, and said, "I think it's time." Elias, who'd been repairing fence 50 yards away, dropped his tools and ran. "Time? Now! Unless you want me to have this baby in the vegetable patch." He got her inside, sent Brennan's oldest son riding for Mrs. Harmon and the midwife in town, then stood helplessly while Clara gripped the table edge and breathed through a contraction. "What do I do?" he asked. "Boil water, get towels, don't panic." "I'm not panicking." "You're absolutely panicking." Another contraction hit, and Clara's knuckles went white. "Just stay with me." So he did. Boiled water he didn't know what to do with. Gathered every towel in the cabin, held Clara's hand while she crushed his fingers and cursed him in German and English, both. Mrs. Harmon arrived first, took one look at the situation, and shooed Elias out. "But out. This is women's work. She's my wife. And she'll still be your wife after the baby comes. Now get out of the way before I throw you out." Elias retreated to the porch, where Brennan had shown up with his wife. They sat with him while the sun climbed higher and the sounds from inside the cabin got worse. Clara screamed, then screamed again. Elias shot to his feet. "I should be in there. You should stay right here," Mrs. Brennan said firmly. "Trust me, you don't want to see this part. That's my wife." Which is exactly why you should let the women who know what they're doing handle it. Hours passed. The midwife arrived and went inside. More screaming. Elias paced the porch until he'd worn a path in the wood. Then, finally, a different sound. A baby crying. Elias froze. Brennan clapped him on the shoulder. "Congratulations!" Mrs. Harmon appeared in the doorway, grinning. "You've got a daughter, and your wife wants to see you." Elias went inside on shaking legs. Clara was in bed, sweaty and pale and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, and her smile lit up the whole room. "Come meet your daughter," she said. Elias crossed to the bed, looked down at the tiny red face peeking out of the blankets. The baby had Clara's nose, his dark hair, and lungs that suggested she'd inherited both their stubborn streaks. "She's perfect," he said. "She's screaming." Still perfect. Clara handed her to him, and Elias held his daughter for the first time. She was so small, so fragile. He was terrified he'd break her. "What should we name her?" Clara asked. They'd argued about names for months, never agreeing on anything. But looking at his daughter now, Elias knew exactly what she should be called. "Anna," he said. "After your mother." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered." "Anna Mercer." Clara tested the name. "I like it." "Good. Because I'm not changing it now." They sat there together, the three of them, while outside the celebration started. Friends arriving, congratulations shouting, someone breaking out a bottle of whiskey that got passed around. But inside the cabin, it was quiet. Just Elias and Clara and Anna beginning the next chapter of their impossible life. The first weeks with the newborn were hell. Anna didn't sleep, or rather she slept in short bursts that never lasted long enough for Elias or Clara to rest properly. She cried constantly, and nothing seemed to help. Clara tried feeding her, changing her, rocking her. Nothing worked. "There's something wrong with her," Clara said on the fifth night, tears streaming down her face from exhaustion. "There's nothing wrong with her. She's just a baby. Babies aren't supposed to cry this much. How would we know? Neither of us has ever had one before." Clara laughed despite herself. "We're terrible at this." "Yeah. What are we going to do?" "Keep trying. What else can we do?" So they kept trying, took turns walking Anna around the cabin at 3 a.m, sang to her, Clara with actual skill, Elias with none whatsoever, but Anna didn't seem to care, learned through trial and error what worked and what didn't. Slowly, impossibly, they figured it out. Anna preferred being held a certain way, liked it when Clara played violin softly, slept better when Elias walked her outside, where the night air and animal sounds seemed to calm her. By the second month, they'd established something resembling a routine. Anna still cried, but not constantly. She started smiling, which made everything else worth it. And she started sleeping for longer stretches at night, which meant Elias and Clara could finally sleep too. "We're getting the hang of this," Clara said one morning, watching Anna grab at sunbeams from her basket. "Don't jinx it." "I'm serious. We're actually doing okay." She was right. They were. But the ranch still needed work. The herd needed tending, and neither of them could do it all while caring for a newborn. The valley stepped in again. Mrs. Harmon came by 3 days a week to watch Anna while Clara helped with the ranch work. The Brennans sent their daughter to help with cooking and cleaning. Miller organized a work party to help Elias expand the pasture. "We'll pay you back," Elias told them. "You already did," Miller said. "You stood up to Keller when nobody else would. That's payment enough." But Elias didn't like being in debt, even the emotional kind, so he made a point of helping his neighbors whenever they needed it. Fixed fences, helped with harvests, lent equipment and labor. And slowly, the homestead grew into something more than just his and Clara's. It became a hub for the community, a place where people stopped for advice, for help, for conversation. Clara thrived on it. She loved having people around, loved being part of something bigger than just their small family. She organized barn raisings and harvest dinners, started a lending library from her books, Taught violin to neighbor children on Sunday afternoons. You're building a community, Elias told her one evening. We're building a community, she corrected. I couldn't do any of this without you. I just fix things and grunt. You do a lot more than that. You show people it's possible to stand up for what's right, to fight for something better. That was you, not me. It was both of us. Clara shifted Anna to her other arm. And it's going to be all three of us from now on. Elias looked at his wife and daughter, backlit by the setting sun, and felt something he'd never thought he'd feel. Complete. Like all the pieces of his life had finally fallen into place. Summer turned to fall. Anna grew, started trying to roll over, grabbed everything within reach. The ranch prospered, the herd was healthy, the garden had produced more than they could use, and Clara's eggs were selling well in town, and Dutch Keller went to trial. The criminal trial was everything the civil one hadn't been: fast, brutal, and public. The prosecution laid out years of intimidation, fraud, and violence. Witness after witness testified about threats, burned barns, stolen land. Keller's lawyer tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. And when Thomas Brennan testified about Keller hiring Dutton specifically to kill the Mercers, the jury's faces went hard. It took them 2 hours to convict. Keller was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized to pay damages. The coalition collapsed without him, and the ranchers who'd followed him scrambled to distance themselves from his crimes. Elias and Clara didn't attend the sentencing. They stayed home with Anna, working the ranch, living their lives. "Don't you want to see him punished?" Mrs. Harmon asked. "He's already punished," Clara said. "He lost everything. That's enough for me." "What about justice?" "Justice is us still being here, still together, still building our life." Clara looked out at the valley. "That's all the justice I need." Winter came again, but this time they were ready. The new barn was stocked with hay. The cattle were healthy and protected. The cabin was warm and solid. And they had Anna, who experienced her first snow by trying to eat it. "She's got your stubbornness," Elias said, watching his daughter grab fistfuls of snow and shove them in her mouth. "And your lack of common sense," Clara replied. They celebrated Anna's first Christmas with half the valley crammed into their cabin. Clara played violin while people sang. Someone brought a fiddle and joined her. The music got loud and joyful and spilled out into the cold night. Elias held Anna, who was fascinated by the candles, and watched Clara play. She caught his eye and he smiled back. This was it. This was what he'd been searching for all those years. Not just a wife, not just a home, but a life. Full and messy and complicated and worth every hard moment. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing worth having ever was. They had another child 2 years later, a son they named Thomas after Brennan, and another daughter 3 years after that, who they called Catherine after Clara's sister who'd finally started writing again. The homestead grew. More land, more cattle, a bigger house to hold their growing family. Elias built the library he'd promised Clara, a whole room just for books, where she taught the valley children to read. They had hard years, droughts and early freezes and cattle that died anyway. Years when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. Years when they fought over stupid things because they were tired and scared. But they also had good years. Years when the cattle sold for record prices. Years when all three children stayed healthy through winter. Years when they looked at what they'd built and could hardly believe it was real. Anna grew into a fierce, intelligent girl who could ride better than most men and had no patience for anyone who suggested she couldn't do something because she was female. Thomas was quieter, thoughtful, with Elias's gift for working with animals and Clara's love of music. Catherine was pure chaos, fearless and loud, and determined to do everything her older siblings did. Elias taught them to work the land, to respect the animals, to value hard work and honesty. Clara taught them to read, to think, to question authority when authority was wrong. Together, they taught them that family wasn't just blood. It was the people who showed up when you needed them, the neighbors who helped rebuild after disasters, the community that formed around shared struggle and shared triumph. The valley changed too. More settlers came. The railroad extended north. Livingston grew from a rough frontier town into something approaching civilization. Montana became a state in 1889, and they celebrated with the whole territory. But some things didn't change. The Mercers were still the family people went to when they needed help. Still, the ones who stood up when standing up was necessary. Still the ones who proved that two stubborn people who refused to quit could build something that lasted. Mrs. Harmon died in the spring of 1895, peacefully in her sleep. They buried her on her own land, overlooking the valley she'd fought to stay in. Half of Yellowstone County came to the funeral. "She was a fighter," Clara said, standing at the grave. "She was," Elias agreed. "We learned that from her." "I think she learned it from you." Clara looked at him. "We learned it from each other, all of us." She was right. The valley had taught them all how to be stronger than they'd been alone, how to build something bigger than individual ambition, how to turn strangers into family. Thomas Brennan died 2 years later in a logging accident. His wife asked Elias and Clara to raise their youngest son, who'd been like family anyway. They said yes without hesitation. "We're collecting children," Elias said as the boys settled into their household. "Good," Clara replied. "The more the merrier." By 1900, the original cabin had been expanded so many times it was hardly recognizable. The homestead sprawled across 500 acres, the herd numbered over 100 head, and the Mercer children, biological and adopted, ran wild across the valley, learning the land the way their parents had. Elias was in his 50s now, gray threading through his dark hair. His hands were scarred from decades of hard work. His back hurt on cold mornings, but he'd never been happier. Clara had aged too. Lines around her eyes from squinting in the sun, silver in her brown hair, the calluses on her hands that never went away. But she still played violin every evening, still argued with him when she thought he was wrong, still looked at him sometimes like she couldn't quite believe they'd made it work. One evening, sitting on the porch while their children played in the yard, Clara said, "Do you ever think about that first day, when I got off the train?" "Sometimes." "What do you think?" "I think I expected someone quiet and obedient," Clara laughed. "You got the exact opposite." "Yeah." "Disappointed?" Elias looked at her. At the woman who'd crossed an ocean to marry a stranger, who'd argued with him from day one, who'd fought beside him through blizzards and violence and years of hard work, who'd built a life with him that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. "Not even a little bit," he said. Clara took his hand. "Good. Because you're stuck with me now." "I know. Forever." "I know that too." They sat there as the sun set, watching their children chase each other through the twilight, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. That they'd gotten lucky. That they'd found each other against all odds. That they'd built something real out of nothing but stubbornness and hope. That sometimes when you refused to quit, when you kept showing up even when it was hard, when you chose partnership over pride, you could create something worth fighting for. The Yellowstone Valley would tell stories about them for generations. About the mail-order bride who refused to be property. About the silent rancher who found his voice. About the winter they saved their neighbors and the fight they won against a man who thought power meant he could do anything. But the real story was quieter, simpler. It was about two people who didn't know if they could build a life together, but decided to try anyway. Who fought and struggled and failed and tried again. Who learned that strength wasn't about being perfect or fearless or always right. It was about showing up, day after day, year after year. Through blizzards and fires and violence and loss, through joy and growth and children and community. It was about partnership. Anna Mercer grew up to run the ranch after her parents died. She married a school teacher from Bozeman and had 5 children of her own. She told them stories about their grandparents, about the winter fight, about the trial, about building a homestead from nothing. Thomas became a veterinarian, the first in the valley, and spent his life caring for the animals his father had taught him to respect. Catherine moved to Helena and became a lawyer, following in Margaret Chen's footsteps. She spent her career defending people who couldn't defend themselves. The adopted children spread across Montana, carrying the Mercer name and the lessons they'd learned. About standing up for what's right, about helping your neighbors, about refusing to quit when things get hard. The homestead itself lasted into the 1950s, when Anna's children finally sold it to a ranching cooperative. But the barn Elias and Clara built after the fire stood until 1978, when a lightning strike finally took it down. The community they helped create lasted longer. The tradition of neighbors helping neighbors, of standing together against those who'd abuse power, of proving that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they refused to back down. And somewhere in all of that, in the stories passed down through generations, was a truth that Elias and Clara had learned the hard way. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect, it was about finding someone who'd fight beside you when things got hard. Someone who'd argue with you when you were wrong and support you when you were right. Someone who saw you at your worst and chose to stay anyway. That building a life worth living wasn't about avoiding hardship. It was about facing hardship with someone who made you stronger than you'd been alone. That the greatest things we create aren't built in moments of ease and comfort. They're built in the struggle. In the choice to keep going when everything says quit. In the stubborn refusal to let adversity win. Elias Mercer died in 1908 at 63, in his sleep beside the woman he'd loved for 17 years. Clara found him in the morning, and the valley said she didn't cry, just held his hand and said goodbye. She lived another 15 years after that, still fierce, still stubborn, still playing violin on the porch in the evenings. When people asked if she missed him, she'd say, of course she did. But she'd also say he was still with her, in the ranch they'd built, in the children they'd raised, in the community they'd created, in every choice she made to keep building, keep fighting, keep showing up. She died in 1923 at 76, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Her last words, according to Anna, were in German, a phrase from her childhood. Weitermachen. Keep going. It was the perfect ending for a woman who'd never quit, who'd crossed an ocean to marry a stranger and turned that desperate gamble into a life worth living. Who'd proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the choices that scare us most. The valley remembered them, not as perfect people, not as heroes without flaws, but as two ordinary people who'd done something extraordinary. They'd refused to quit. They'd chosen partnership over pride. They'd built something real, and in doing so, they'd shown everyone who came after that it was possible, that you could start with nothing and build everything, that you could face the worst the world threw at you and come out stronger. That love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who made you want to be better, who challenged you, who fought beside you, who chose you day after day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That was the real story of Elias and Clara Mercer. Not the dramatic fights or the courtroom victories or the barn fire that nearly killed them both. It was the quiet choice, made every single day, to show up for each other, to build together, to refuse to quit. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.